The Sydney crime scene photos police thought would never be seen.
There's a sense of, big bad city where bad things can happen.
There's something big on the end of this line. A body-wrenching battle in the middle of Sydney Harbour.
There he is, look at him.
And this is what they pulled out, a 200-kilogram bull shark.
It's the biggest bull shark I've ever seen. It was about 10.5 foot.
Damon Smith-Horak was out catching kingfish in waters off South Head when he snared this monster last week. Man versus shark, it took him 2 long hours to reel it in.
Oh, you're gonna eat the boat!
It was the 3rd shark that had taken his bait, but the only one he managed to keep on the line. The one that got away, this hook bent by a tiger shark more than 4 metres long.
A secluded beach, the scene of a rare emergency. Flesh ripped off the bone, deep bite wounds.
Shark attack.
Really?
Yeah. That was a juvenile great white shark of between 2.7 and 3.2 metres in length.
We've searched the area and have not been able to identify any marine life.
This is where they caught the bull shark, around 500 metres off Watson's Bay. It's a popular spot for swimmers, divers and kayakers, completely unaware of what's lurking in the water.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Shaun Jeffery.
Sharks have a long and unique history as a species. They've been part of the Earth's oceans for a long time. The earliest shark fossils date back to almost 450 million years. Dinosaurs did not appear until around 230 million years ago, meaning sharks have lived around 3 times as long as dinosaurs, and around 100 times as long as hominids, or human-like animals. There have been 5 mass extinctions in the past 439 million years, and sharks have survived them all. The first representation of a shark and human encounter was discovered drawn on a vase dated from the year 725 BC. References to sharks are found throughout Greek legends and accounts, and many cultures around the world saw sharks as cultural symbols, such as gods or the spirit of their ancestors, while other cultures saw them as malevolent demons. Great white sharks were first described in 1776 in a journal, while stories of monster sharks persisted in ships' logs and sailors' tales. The first major modern work on classifying sharks was not completed until the early 1800s. In 1974, Peter Benchley published Jaws, and the popularity of the novel resulted in the creation of the classic movie, which became one of the most influential movies in history in regards to public opinion of sharks. Following the movie's release, a rise in shark fishing tournaments resulted in a mass decline in shark populations and a highly negative public opinion of sharks altogether. Even today, sharks and humans have a complicated relationship. Shark populations are in severe decline due to human activities. Scientists are predicting that sharks could be facing extinction for the first time in history. They've survived the 5 mass extinction events, but they might not survive humans. Long before Jaws was written and turned into the classic movie we know today, humans and sharks have always had a tenuous relationship. Back in 1935, off the beaches of Sydney, Australia, the shark was public enemy number 1. and its relationship isn't much better today, really. But back in late February and early March 1935, 3 young men had been taken by sharks at New South Wales beaches alone. It got to the stage where bounty hunters were employed to help rid Sydney's beaches of the man-eaters. This coastal Australian setting, this scene of an environment teeming with fear and aggression towards the unknown dangers that sharks can pose to humans that inhabit the waters off Sydney's beaches. The year 1935. All of this is the setting for where our story begins. On the 17th of April, 1935, a fisherman by the name of Albert Hudson is enjoying a day fishing the coastal waters about 3 kilometres, 1.8 miles off Coogee Beach with his son Ronald. After a few hours fishing, Hudson hooked a small shark. But where there is small sharks, there's often bigger sharks. There's always a bigger fish. As Hudson was bringing the small shark to the side of the boat, a 4-metre tiger shark, that's over 13 feet long, rose from the deep, dark ocean waters and swallowed the smaller shark in a single mouthful. Now Albert Hudson had a 4-metre tiger shark on the end of his line. Albert decided to take the large tiger shark, which was still alive, to the nearby Coogee Aquarium baths. His brother was the proprietor of the venue. He figured it would make a pretty awesome attraction. The following weekend was Anzac Day long weekend, and this sort of thing might bring a crowd. And he was right. Given the recent deaths in the area by a shark attack, people were understandably curious to see such a man-eating creature up close. Crowds now flocked to the Coogee Aquarium baths to see this monster with man-eating capabilities. The huge tiger shark was given the run of one entire pool at the aquarium. For several days, the shark seemed quite active and had an insatiable appetite. To this day, though, sharks struggle to be kept in an aquarium setting. I suppose when you're able to roam the entire ocean, being confined to a small area must have some pretty damaging psychological effects. Nevertheless, a few days later, on the 25th of April, Anzac Day, the shark began acting strangely. It appeared ill, moved slowly and was seemingly disoriented. All of a sudden, amidst a bunch of splashing and a commotion from the inside of the pool, and while spectators watched, the shark spluttered, convulsed, and then vomited, and out popped a human arm. As you can imagine, people were quite concerned. At first, everyone assumed another tragic accident had taken place. Clearly, another swimmer must have been fatally attacked off the coast somewhere. But this idea was quickly squashed. Upon medical examination of the arm, it was revealed that it had not been bitten off by the shark, but had been removed from the body with a knife or other sharp instrument, and not in any surgical procedure. The focus of the investigation now turned to murder. The gastric juices of sharks are highly acidic, but it was estimated that the arm could have been in its stomach for between 8 and 18 days. Yet the arm was so well preserved that there was a still recognisable tattoo of 2 boxes facing off on the forearm. 3 days later, the aquarium owners killed the shark and gutted it. Perhaps there was more remains inside the shark. There wasn't. It would seem the smaller shark had swallowed the arm whole before itself was swallowed by the larger tiger shark. A sort of Russian stack doll scenario going from large shark to smaller shark, but ending with the smallest piece not being a tiny shark, but a human arm. An investigation was publicly launched. Detectives from the Sydney Criminal Investigative Bureau reached out to the public for help in identifying the mystery arm with tattoo. They surprisingly actually had some luck. After reading a report in a Sydney newspaper, one Edwin Smith contacted police, suggesting that the arm could belong to his brother, James. And because of the well-preserved state of the arm, police managed to obtain some fingerprints, which confirmed that the arm had in fact belonged to one James Smith. James Smith was born in England in 1890. He'd been missing since the 7th of April, 1935, so first reported missing around 10 days before the shark was first hooked off Coogee Beach. Smith's arm and tattoo were also positively identified by Smith's wife, Gladys. Quoting a Sydney newspaper article from the time,
"By one chance in a million, the fact that little more than a week ago, a sick shark in captivity at Coogee Aquarium disgorged a tattooed human arm. Some of the best brains of the Sydney CIB are convinced that fate has revealed a cold-blooded murder. The victim of this mysterious death drama is James Smith of Gladsville, former billiards maker at City Tattersall Club, a well-known suburban billiards saloon keeper, one-time promising lightweight boxer, and a man with seemingly not an enemy in the world."
End quote. Seemingly not an enemy in the world. This may be a bit of an understatement, I think. James Smith was a bankrupt builder, a former bookmaker and boxer, and a small-time criminal with a record of minor convictions. He had drifted onto the edges of the underworld and become involved in the illegal gambling that was rife throughout Sydney at the time. This was soon after the end of the First World War, after all, with thousands of ex-servicemen returning home after years away. A period of lawlessness descended on Sydney. The Great Depression had hit hard, and high unemployment drove many men and women to crime just to survive. The police eventually managed to turn up some information regarding James Smith's last known location. They found that Smith had been seen drinking with his longtime friend, Patrick Brady, in the Cecil Hotel at Cronulla. They had then returned to a cottage rented by Brady on the shore of Gunnamatta Bay. Patrick Brady was also well known to the local law. He was an expert forger. After receiving the vital piece of information in any murder case, the last known whereabouts of the victim, the police then received another piece of vital information from a Cronulla cab driver. On the morning after Jim Smith was seen for the last time, Patrick Brady hailed a cab in Cronulla and asked to be taken to an address at 3 Bayview Street, McMahon's Point, New South Wales, North Sydney. The cab was directed to pull up outside a house that turned out to be the home of middle-class businessman Reginald Lloyd Holmes. Holmes was a seemingly respectable self-employed businessman who ran a highly successful boat-building business on the harbour foreshore at McMahon's Point on Lavender Bay. But Holmes was also known to be involved in other, less legitimate business activities. He ran and controlled a lucrative smuggling ring, using speedboats built at his boat shed to pick up cocaine, cigarettes and other contraband thrown overboard from ships passing off the Sydney coast. James Smith was a sometime employee of Reginald Holmes, and often drove one of the speedboats during the smuggling operations. But it would appear they had had a falling out of some kind. Word got around over a failed insurance scam, and it was speculated that maybe James Smith had begun to blackmail Reginald Holmes, apparently using Holmes's high standing position in society against him. All of this aside though, the police were still stuck. All this evidence they'd gathered so far, all the pieces of the puzzle that police had managed to collect against Brady and Holmes were purely circumstantial. They needed a confession or something rock solid. Police decided to arrest Patrick Brady and took him to the Central Police Station. Reginald Holmes was also brought in for questioning, but he denied ever even knowing Brady or being involved in any of this in any way. So let's just quickly recap. A father and a son are out fishing off Cronulla Beach in Sydney. They catch a shark. As they're pulling in that shark, it's eaten by another shark. So the fisherman takes the big shark to his brother's seaside aquarium centre. Days later, that shark vomits up a severed human arm that is identified as belonging to James Smith. James Smith is last known to have been seen drinking with known criminal Patrick Brady. The morning after they are last seen together, Patrick Brady hails a taxi to drive him from his rented cottage at Gunnamatta Bay to the house of known criminal businessman Reginald Holmes. Brady is arrested for the murder and Holmes both brought in for questioning, but nothing of any real significance is gained. They all deny everything. So now, weeks after the 4-metre tiger shark vomited up a severed arm of James Smith, the case seems to have hit a brick wall. There's no real leads. A few weeks later, on the 20th of May, Reginald Holmes left his boat shed in a mad rush. He sped out of his Sydney boat shed in a speedboat, headed out into the harbour, but then slowed, and then stopped completely. As his speedboat sat idling, Reginald Holmes pulled out a pistol, aimed it into his forehead, and pulled the trigger. He shot himself straight in the head. He toppled over the side of his speedboat and fell into the water. As his limp body fell over the side of the boat, though, his arm wrapped into a mooring rope attached to the side of the boat and tightened around his wrist. This stopped him from falling into the harbour and drowning. Otherwise, he would have actually died. Isn't he already dead, you ask? He just shot himself in the head. Nope. When Reginald Holmes put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger, the bullet actually compressed against the hard bone of his forehead and ricocheted off. It didn't pierce his skull at all. It simply stunned him, knocked him unconscious. Then, as he fell overboard, the rope stopped him from falling into the chilly harbour water and drowning. But the shock of actually hitting the cold water did, however, revive him, and he hazily crawled back aboard the speedboat with a very sore head. The water police were alerted to the strange scene taking place out on the harbour and rushed to the scene. At this point, a 4-hour boat chase began. The Sydney Water Police pursued Holmes out past Circular Quay, through the mid-morning ferry traffic right down Sydney Harbour until, finally, he slowed and gave up just outside the Sydney Heads. Reginald Holmes was finally arrested and started to talk. Agreeing to be a witness against Patrick Brady, he told Detective Sergeant Frank Matthews, one of the lead investigators, that Patrick Brady had killed James Smith, dismembered his body, and stowed it into a trunk that he had then thrown into Gunnamatta Bay. He then claimed Patrick Brady had come to his home, showed him the severed arm of James Smith and threatened Holmes with murder if he did not receive £500 immediately. Holmes also admitted that after Patrick Brady had left his home, he travelled to the Sydney coastal suburb of Maroubra and discarded Smith's arm into the surf. The case against Patrick Brady now seemed rock solid. They had a motive, a valid accusation, and evidence to back it up, as well as the fact that Patrick Brady was the last person to be seen with the living James Smith when he had both his arms and all, before one popped out of a shark's mouth weeks later. The case then took another strange turn. On the 11th of June 1935, Reginald Holmes withdrew £500 from his account and late in the evening left home, telling his wife he had to meet someone. He seemed very cautious as he left his house. Early the next morning, he was found dead in his car at Hickson Road, Dawes Point. He had been shot 3 times at close range. The crime scene was made to appear that Holmes had committed suicide, but forensic police had no doubt that he was murdered. Gee, I'm sure that was hard. Shooting yourself 3 times isn't the very typical suicide. Holmes was due to give evidence at Smith's inquest later that morning. It was at 1:20 a.m. on the 12th of June, just hours before the start of the inquest into James Smith's death, that Reginald Holmes, the key witness for the prosecution, was found slumped over the wheel of his car. He wouldn't be testifying to anything ever. Although Holmes was the inquest's star witness, he was never offered police protection before his testimony could be heard. Reginald Holmes was cremated at Northern Suburbs Crematorium on the 13th of June 1935. He left an estate valued at over £34,000 in 1935 money, which would be worth millions of dollars today. The inquest's most important witness, Reginald Holmes, was now dead. The case against Patrick Brady fell apart rapidly due to lack of evidence. Although the cab driver testified that Patrick Brady had been dishevelled, had kept a hand in his pocket and wouldn't take it out, almost as though he was hiding something in his jacket, and was clearly frightened that somebody was following him on the morning that he had driven him to Reginald Holmes's property. The trial was over in less than 2 days. The judge directed that a verdict of not guilty should be reached. The lawyer serving Patrick Brady's defence, one Clive Evatt, KC, claimed to the coroner that there was not even enough substance to begin the inquest. Evatt argued that, quote, an arm did not constitute a body, end quote, and that a James Smith minus his arm could still be alive walking around somewhere as a one-armed man. Then, even more information began to emerge. James Smith had been a police informer, a fizzer, or a fizgig as they were called at the time, and he had informed on a young man called Eddie Wayman. As a result of the information that Smith had given to the police, Wayman and one of his mates were caught red-handed, raiding a bank. So that's definitely another enemy James Smith had. Though the crimes were never formally linked, there was firm opinions that Wayman was a likely suspect for the murder of Reginald Holmes too, a sort of tying up of loose ends. Wayman was one of the most dangerous criminals in Sydney in the 1930s, a time when the underworld was populated by hard men and women who didn't hesitate to use violence to get what they wanted. Holmes was deeply involved in the lucrative but dangerous cocaine trade, and could well have been the victim of a gangland-style killing, as Sydney, in this period, was experiencing a crime wave. There was open gang warfare in the streets of King Cross and East Sydney, battles over control of cocaine distribution and prostitution. Darlinghurst was commonly known as Razorhurst, after the gang's most used weapon. And there was one unwritten rule: you never squeal to the cops. So with both Smith and Holmes, it could have been a case of cleaning up, getting rid of those who had fallen out with some of Sydney's leading criminals. James Smith had been exposed as a police informant, and therefore would have been a target for assassination by any number of gangland kingpins. All we know for sure is this: James Smith's arm ended up in a shark's stomach, and Reginald Holmes died slouched over his steering wheel. And Patrick Brady? Well, he was acquitted and walked from court a free man. It would appear that whatever really happened, and whoever it was that possibly knew the full details of the whole shark and the arm mystery, took the information with them to the grave. And maybe even a watery grave at that.
To climb Officer has engaged suspect vehicle in pursuit. Confirmed. Pursuit engaged. All units be advised we have a pursuit in progress.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Stand by to assist.